they let me know right away that this is BS and they don't have time for this. They need real things that work. So sometimes when people want to know what kind of Buddhist I am, I think, oh, I'm mostly a prison Buddhist. Um, the text I've chosen to talk about, Prison of Life, was written, yeah, 50, almost 50 years ago, or delivered quite a time ago by Buddhadasa. Buddhadasa was a very highly respected and important figure in Thai Buddhism in the 20th century. He was a very strongly outspoken cultural critic and critic of the status quo within the monastic tradition of Thailand. And alongside being a self-guided Dharma scholar, he was a social critic that he published about politics as well as Dharma. He published about economics, and he stands outside the other traditions. So if you're used to the insight meditation tradition, which is quite a bit from Ajahn Chah's lineage, Buddhadasa is not in the Ajahn Chah lineage. He was not part of that community. Buddhadasa and Ajahn Chah, I'm trying to remember, I believe they never actually met. They planned to meet right near the end of their lives because they were contemporaries. And if I remember the story correctly, Ajahn Chah passed away just before they were to meet. But they respected each other, but they did not teach from the same perspective. Buddhadasa taught a lot from the perspective that he felt if you looked at the text directly and then you used your analytical skills, that you'd be able to figure out what all that was necessary for understanding the Dhamma. So what we looked at last week was the basic components of this talk, Prison of Life, which is a talk about 10 categories or 10 aspects of life which are what he calls prisons. And then I offered some guidelines, some homework to let people have a chance to engage with not just the text, but the implications of the text. So I will talk about those in a second. I'm just sort of seeing, we've had one more person join in. Okay, great. Yeah, before I jump in, I would like to check base with, is there anybody who has any immediate questions or comments, especially those of you who were involved with the class last week? Did you have any success? Thumbs up for me with okay, good. Did anybody feel like that the handout was crappy and I did not like it and it did not work for me? Okay. Okay, so success with the handout a little bit. Okay, good. Good. So Buddhadasa, when he spoke this talk, I think you can hear, if you read it out loud, or if you can hear his voice as you read it, that he is offering a kind of gentle rebuke to those who might be very loyal Buddhists who come to temple every week, who make offerings, who follow in the path of what a good Buddhist would do. He talks about how we entrap ourselves with clinging to the Dhamma, clinging to teachers, clinging to holy places, clinging to superstitions. This is not a talk that is highlighting clinging in the same way that I see it talked about often in my tradition, which is that clinging causes problems. Say if we're very having a lot of greed and we're really clinging to the idea of fulfilling that greed, then we will end up being selfish, and we can see our selfishness quite easily. We can see the harm it does. or if we are feeling very defended and we don't want our vulnerability to be poked at by the world, we might be a little bit sharp with people. We can see our temper, and we can see very clearly the problem there of clinging to a sense of safety, clinging to a sense of invulnerability. But here he's talking about clinging to the, among other things, the actual core components of life and of Dharma practice. So he talks about clinging to life itself, clinging to our instincts and our sensations, that all of these components of our spiritual life and our physical life can be problematic, really asks us to be brave and honest in how we assess. I think whenever we're asked to assess the parts of our life that are comfortable and pleasant for clinging, it's a bigger ask than when we ask to assess what's difficult and painful. So in the handout that I had offered, and I will admit it's a rough handout, but I'm hoping that everyone can get something from it. What I was trying to encourage people to engage with was not necessarily looking directly at the factors of life that are listed in the talk, but looking at the signs of imprisonment. And so that was what we talked about a lot last week, were the signs of imprisonment and how to use their presence as a flag for your attention and as a place to start off examining what is present here that I'm not seeing. So we'll be talking about that quite a bit after the meditation. We'll be talking about the ways that we can, through our daily life, highlight areas that let us see what was hidden before. And then we'll talk about clinging and how undoing clinging might look. So for today's talk, I'm hoping that we can have a little bit more back and forth period at the end, because I'd really like to hear what everyone experienced through the week and what your takes are on this material. But as is the tradition, and a good tradition, I would have us all start with a bit of meditation to allow our minds to clear and focus so that we'll be ready to receive the Dhamma and hear and respond at our best. So unless anybody has anything that's coming up, I would invite you all to prepare yourself, your video and your physical, for meditation, and we'll meditate for about 20-25 minutes. And the technique I'll be guiding you through is actually going to be breath focused, because this was the type of meditation that Buddhadasa was most interested in practicing and teaching. Anapanasati, awareness of breathing, awareness of in and out breath. Okay. If you have a different preferred type of meditation, you are welcome to just let my voice be in the background. You don't have to follow along if it's uncomfortable in any way. And if anything happens where my video or my presence drops out, I will reconnect. I live rurally, so sometimes I run into problems with electrical feed, but we should be all good for this morning. So please make yourself comfortable. And as you're doing that, I recommend that you roll your shoulders a few times, open up your chest and back with a little bit of movement, because breath meditation is focusing on the rib cage and lungs. It's really helpful to get the rib cage and lungs moving and get them to be a little more free. And then you can try taking a few deep breaths. And as you begin to direct your energy inwardly to connect with your presence and with your breathing. I want to invite you to send a query into yourself of how am I? How am I right now? How is it right now to be in this body in this time and place? And let the direct experience you have be your answer, a wordless answer of directly knowing the state of your body, the overall feel of your energy level and your mental clarity, your emotional qualities. Just notice what is present and alive in you right now. Whatever you notice, while that is happening, you are also breathing. So if you're sitting and your body is also breathing. If you're lying down, you're also breathing. And as you focus your attention, you're also breathing. Breathing is an and, meaning that it is something that is happening so consistently that whatever you are doing or thinking or even saying, you are doing that and you are also breathing. I want to invite that concept to rest in your mind, that everything you've done, you've felt, you've experienced, your breathing has been part of that experience. So breath is a kind of companion to life. Now, breathing has a sensitivity to it that makes it tremble when the world trembles, that breathing is responsive to whatever we experience. Just like the surface of the lake will be touched by the breeze and the reflections will be shifted, our breath is touched by whatever we experience. So if you're holding in mind this possibility that your breath has been there for everything you've ever experienced, it hasn't been there as an aloof witness, but it has been there touched and touching whatever you have experienced. So the words that you've said in your life have been said with breath. And the silence that you've kept in your life has been kept with breathing. Anything you've embraced or rejected, anything you've engaged with or walked away from has been touched by your breathing, and your breathing has been touched by that experience. And with that in mind, I want to invite everyone to breathe and appreciate how your breath holds such intimacy and connection with your life. Feel the way your muscles, your bones and organs move as you breathe. Feel it from inside your body. Breathing has momentum and flow and can be compared to something like the ocean waves at the beach. There is momentum that draws air in, a certain shifting, steady pull as the lungs are expanded, the diaphragm tightens, the body receives air. And then at some point, that process slows and the direction of airflow turns. Let your breath touch every corner of your body. And let your breath begin to brighten your mind. Just as you can bring air to a fire to heat the fire, think of your mind being open and lit like the sunny day sky. And you can start to prepare to transition from awareness of breath back into the group activity by, with your next few breaths, moving your hands or your feet, opening your eyes. And I offer a bow to everyone for your welcome and gratitude again at you being here. Laura, I'm having difficulties, continuing difficulties as I did last time with my computer. So I'm going to have to log in again with my phone,
Okay.
which means I won't be able to see anybody's screen.
Okay. You won't be able to see all of us. Is that
All
right?
of us, yeah, at the one time. But I will be just doing that shortly at this moment. So give me one sec.
Yeah. Let's take a bio break. Okay, I made you a co-host, so you should be able to unmute.
There, can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Sorry about that. Yes, just I found out the hard way last week that my computer battery is dying and I'm having all this connectivity problem. And while I wait for the part to come, I still have to figure out a way to be online. So I'll be on my phone and I'm just going to pull up the text of the handout as well.
Would you like me to screen share that?
Oh yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Can you see it, or do you want me to tell you where we are?
No, I can see it just great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm just checking what my other choices are. I can do, oh yes, I can see people or I can see the document. Brilliant. That is great. Thanks so much for the help, Laura. Okay. So just catching my thoughts. What to talk about? I've been thinking a lot about our last meeting and what to add to what we discussed. And I would like to add a few bits of a few thoughts to what I had offered in the handout. I wanted to make things clear. So I'm going to start a little distance away from the text. I'm going to start with identifying through direct observation as part of a Buddhist path. So I'm a Theravadan Buddhist. And I think, although this is where we focus a lot, I believe that all traditions focus on this quite a bit, which is knowing what is happening in the moment as it happens phenomenologically. So we're knowing it not at a conceptual level where we're trying to understand, say, what are the social dynamics at play, or how does this person use language and what does it reflect on their educational background. What we're trying to understand is the world as we feel it, the felt experience of each moment of time. Because we believe that, or we experience that all phenomena have a felt aspect. And in that level of detail, which is sort of zooming in on the details of an experience, you begin to see the structure of mind, the structure of karma, and the structure of mind within the experience. So when you're feeling yourself breathing, you're not just feeling yourself breathing as a physiological activity. You also will be able to feel something about your emotional experience at the moment because your breathing connects to your emotions, and you'll be able to feel the energy of your body, maybe your health. You might feel some deeper feelings of mental activity in the subconscious, et cetera, et cetera. The idea is that when you are aware of anything in the moment, you're going to be knowing both the phenomena and the structure of mind that is knowing. So there's this practice of deep understanding through deep observation. And because the path of Dhamma is a path of intentional guidance of one's own development, we're cultivating ourself, we're cultivating our awareness, we're cultivating our experiencing and our mind. Because we are growing and changing, there are choices we're making that are guided by the deep experiencing we're doing. So we experience the world deeply with clarity and detail, and then we make choices to incline ourselves towards kindness and away from the use of force to dominate. We incline our minds towards gladness and away from dwelling on negatives that can build up a kind of poisonous atmosphere. Our cultivation is towards health of a certain kind, in the sense of not just physical health, but balance and an integrity with our understanding of Dhamma. So the path says, look closely, and as you look closely, understand, and in your understanding, choose, and in your choices, direct the growth of yourself. Does that make sense the way I've lined that out? Yeah. And so many things can be seen, but there's one category that's very hard to see. A little Donald Rumsfeld throwback here. It's the unknown unknowns are very hard to see through direct observation. We can sometimes sense where our blind spots are. We can sometimes sense the things we're in denial about. But it's very, very hard as you go deeper into your own structure of your mind. It's hard to see a certain kind of clinging and a certain kind of reactivity. And this, in my studies and my practice, I see this as relating to that uh, there is a place where things become invisible. When we have clinging and craving, we want the things we love to be present and the things we desire to grow stronger. We want the things we dislike and don't want to be absent, and if they are present, we want them to fade. So the basic outline that's given in the Pali Suttas for what is our relationship to our experience is that because of clinging and craving, we want good things to be born and to live a long time. We want bad things to have a very short life and fade away quickly and not come back. If what we want to grow is also something that makes us feel safe and strong, if our pleasure is something that also makes us feel safe, it's very hard to see the clinging there. Where our desires and our clinging map to things that have very high status, it's very hard to see our clinging there. I feel as if what Buddhadasa, well, it's sort of obvious actually, that what Buddhadasa is talking about in this text, when he talks about the prisons of life, he's not talking about the kinds of situations where we are highly motivated to change. He's talking about aspects of our life that we're going to have very insidious and difficult to see clinging and craving. And why it's going to be difficult to see is because it will be parallel to and interwoven with our drive to survive, which comes with this body, our drive towards social acceptance, which comes with this body and nervous system, and our drive towards feeling confident in ourselves, which is something that the ego is very deeply invested in, feeling like it's got a good hold on life. And so rather than highlighting obvious challenges with clinging and craving that get us into trouble, he has highlighted places where we may not examine our clinging and craving so well. And so what I had offered with the handout was a blueprint for how you could see where your clinging and craving is that is not looking for clinging and craving right as it occurs, but looking for something different. So I'm going to go to the handout now and just retouch on what's there. The second little section that I have separated by horizontal lines. Wherever the conditions and signs of prison exist, right there is dukkha. That is, yeah, there you go. Being captured, incarcerated, enchained, and put through difficulties and hassles. I I was trying to invite everyone through the week to look not for the dukkha, but for the conditions and signs of prison existing. So I was saying this was like being a naturalist, and you're not looking for just the animal that you're looking for, the bird you're looking for, but you're looking for the tracks and the food and the environment. You're looking for the context in which dukkha, this suffering, and then upadana, the clinging, arises. And I gave two sets of tracks to look for. One where the conditions and signs of prison, the next section down, I talked about if you find yourself having a very strong sense of right and wrong in your mind, if you feel as if something is irritating you because it's the wrong thing to do and there's a right way to do things, or that there's some sense of rules. Could be a strong sign that there is underneath some clinging and craving. Or if you have a sense of blame, if either you're blaming yourself or you're blaming other people or you're blaming society, it's all the same. If there's a sense of blame of people being done wrong by, if you have any presence arise in your mind of a belief that people need to be punished for their own good, or if you have a sense of, I had better suck this up since this is my fault, any kind of dynamic where there is a sense of righteousness to the encouragement to feel discomfort because somehow the discomfort is validating the learning experience. This would be a sign of imprisonment, self-imprisonment. Or if you feel that you are trying to prove somehow to yourself or to others that you are good enough, that you're worthy to be loved or worthy to be thought well of. These could all be signs of imprisonment. So what I'm saying is that where things are difficult to see, where craving and clinging are difficult to see, it does not mean they are not imprisoning us. They are still imprisoning us. And instead of looking directly for the clinging and craving that imprisons, we look for the signs of imprisonment. So the reactivity to the experience of imprisonment. I had said there was another way to identify this kind of imprisonment. And that would be, and this is at the end of the document, or a little bit later down, many of the defining features of incarceration are linked to negative mental health outcomes, including disconnection, loss of autonomy, boredom, a lack of purpose, and unpredictability of surroundings. Now, that quote's not from Buddhadasa, that's from a criminologist. But I felt like it was a very concise summary of the psychological impacts of imprisonment. And here's where I'm drifting from Dhamma into my work as a prison chaplain. Because Buddhadasa puts forward a strong argument that what he's using, why he's using the word prison, is because he literally means this is what we do to ourselves. He talks about at the beginning of the text that we make a guard, we make a prison, we make a cell, we make a punishment for ourselves. I think that it's not an unreasonable leap to say the kinds of mental impacts that occur in real life with real prisons on real people can also be seen in each of us when our own clinging imprisons us. So, where a physical prison and its restrictions can create a kind of disconnection and meaninglessness in the life of prisoners, where our clinging and craving imprisons us and inhibiting our life, we can end up feeling within life a kind of meaninglessness and disconnection. That where in in the literal world, the prison situation can make people feel incredibly um, over sort of stressed by the chaos, that they have no predictability to their situation. Our lives as Dhamma practitioners, we can see that the way our craving and clinging attaches us to certain things eventually undermines our sense of understanding how the world is working, and we start to feel like we're in chaos. So what I'm saying is that there's not too much difference between how it feels to be a human in a prison and how it feels to be a human in samsara. That, especially when we're looking at our own samsaric piece where we are creating this prison for ourselves, we will feel just as frustrated, just as disconnected, just as confused, and have a problem with feeling engaged and having a sense of purpose in any area of our life where we're very deeply inhibited. And so what is difficult to see directly And that would be the clinging and craving to the topics that Buddhadasa gives. What's difficult to see directly there can be witnessed indirectly. And by witnessing the indirect markers of imprisonment, we then have a place where we can start untangling through reflection where the self imprisonment is happening. Okay. So I want to stop there for a second and just offer a chance for any responses or questions from any of you. Because I want to know if you're following me, and I want to know if this makes sense to you, and I want to know if you have any other thoughts. No? Okay. So thumbs up, we're all following. This makes sense. That sounds good. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Now, I thought, let's see where we got the time. Oh, now that I'm on my phone, I don't know what time it is. We got about an hour. I thought that I would share an instance of where I felt some of this, where this dynamic became obvious to me over the last week. And then if anybody else wants to share anything, a few examples could be helpful. So I have an elderly mother who I'm doing caretaking with through the week. I see her a few times a week and help her out with things. And she's in a lot of pain. She's in a lot of discomfort physically that she can't relieve. And so she's not very happy. She's suffering quite a bit. And I was with her, and I could feel myself in our dynamic of me finding ways to help her, having a sense of trying to prove to somebody that I'm present, even though it's challenging, and helping her. I could feel a little bit of what I call the parole officer dynamic. I could feel myself trying to show up is in a good way with like sort of a good attitude, a little bit of what we call in the prison system impression management. I wanted mom to know I loved her. I wanted me to know that I was a good daughter. And I was feeling a little bit of resentment around it. And I sat there, and normally, I would sort of take that at face value and encourage myself maybe to just be patient and have some metta, have some kindness. But I thought, okay, those are signs of a prison. Those are signs of if I read what I'm experiencing as signs of I'm trying to please my parole officer, what is the parole officer judging me on? So I got to go back and reflect a little bit on the dynamic in my own mind of unresolved emotions about the past and trying to write the end of my mother's life and my relationship with my mother to be a good and loving relationship, while I did not have yet full acceptance of some of the dynamics of our past. And that for me was surprising because I had not realized how much there was still a marbling of unresolved childhood stuff. Who knew? Who knew that would still be there? So I had a chance to look at a dynamic I see very, very frequently, but then perceive that deeper than I had seen before. There is this ambition I have where I'm going to prove to the world that I am a good daughter, and that there is a part of me that is really clinging to, I want her when my mother passes to, I want to feel no guilt. I want to feel no guilt, zero guilt ambition for me, that I've done everything I can. And so I was like, oh, so there's this sort of type of prison where I'm clinging to, I don't want to make any mistakes. I don't want to have any any marks that would be on my character. I want to be better than human. I want to be perfect. And that let me see something about a doorway where there could be a little more realistic freedom, that when two human beings are in a close relationship, struggling through end of life and pain, there's just no way to do it perfectly. Yeah. So not a stunning realization, but a place in my own life where there was a kind of clinging that I hadn't seen before. Or at least I felt like it was a little bit new for me. So that would be an example of how through the week things came up a little bit. I also had another experience at work when I was working with some guys where I got very sort of frustrated with the dynamic that was going on in a group and was able to also say, oh, this is rebellion. I am rebelling against control. I'm feeling controlled by the way the guys at work are sort of as a group trying to dominate the room, and was able to examine a little bit how relating to men in prison can be done from my ego, or can be done with a much more open perspective of just living beings being together. Was anybody else through the week able to identify any markers of imprisonment? Did anything come up for anybody? You don't have to share too much. I don't want to force exposure, but I just would like to hear a few things, because I think a few of you seem to have benefit or find something interesting about the handout. Can anyone share? And Laura, I think you put your hand up first.
Yeah, for me, like I've been getting frustrated in groups of people about how we're all responding differently to like the political situation or what's going on.
Mm,
And so it's kind of like the judge or maybe the probation officer also sort of like either getting frustrated with other people or frustrated with myself that I'm frustrated with them. Um, and what I have found useful about this teaching, and in fact, I heard um, an instruction that it's actually it was part of Pema Chodron's instruction for Tonglen that says like at the beginning of the Tonglen practice, feel into the pain of the situation. So it's kind of like really skillfully non-specific. It's like if you keep trying to look at the thing, sometimes,
mhm,
we tighten and then I'm becoming, or there's a part of me that's becoming the probation officer and the dukkha like increases. But if you like do what I feel like I'm hearing you say in this teaching, sort of like don't look directly at the thing, but look at the surrounding conditions, then things become more clear.
mhm,
That's like how it's kind of feeling for me.
mhm.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yes. Nothing can be said that Pema Chodron hasn't also said something brilliant about, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Natalie, did you want to share something?
I have a prison of, I think you mentioned it at the beginning of, I should be nice to people. And I generally am, but sometimes it's a major lift for me. Not so much the being nice, but keeping quiet about things that are maybe too much for me or even for them. And, uh, sometimes the air has to be cleared around that. And I did that with somebody this past week, and it was very shaky for me because I don't normally do that kind of thing. Um, it seemed to work out okay. I said my feelings. I said what I think that we should do, and the other person was kind of like taken aback, and I haven't heard from them. But it was reaching a, a cataclysmic point for me, and I knew that. But this subject matter made me say to myself, or allowed me to see for myself, that this is not really working out for me. And it's not that there's something wrong with them or wrong with me or necessarily wrong with the relationship, but the way we were managing the relationship, I don't know if it
Mm,
was conducive to good spiritual health. And
mm,
I said, I think we should maybe be more reserved around each other and communicate with each other differently and take it to a different level. And there's no right or wrong in this and no judgment on this, but it wasn't working. And if I had the courage or maybe the insight, it would be more correct to say, to see that about myself and about them and to bring it out and to talk about it.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to add or just reflections at this point before I go on? Okay. So I'm not going to address too much more about the handout at this moment. I just want to, I guess, wax philosophical for a few minutes. I've been a Buddhist for a long time. I'm sure a lot of you here have been. I know that that's one of the things I value about these opportunities is that there's some very long-term practitioners here. And one of the things I've seen over the years of being a Buddhist is a certain kind of question in mind, which is, how could this happen? So I'm going to talk about something that's not quite related to the Dharma talk, but it'll come around. How could it happen that in the 20th century, so many Buddhist teachers in North America have had such ethical scandals? That is a big question. How could that happen? How could it happen that Sasaki Roshi, who was a very highly regarded Zen master, could be having his young female students expose themselves, asking for them to expose themselves to him during one-on-one interviews on retreat? How could it be that one of the living masters of Zen, that out of all of the living teachers is one of the ones most acclaimed as possibly enlightened across all the lineages, would have such inappropriate behavior with female students? This for me is the kind of example of a big question, which is, how can we work so hard on this path and be so deep in this practice and yet still act so unskillfully? How can that happen? I have chewed on that for many, many years of my life. And in going to work in the prison system, I've had an opportunity to face something I never would have been able to face otherwise, which is working with the humanity of those who've been convicted of serious harm to other people. And I've come to see, from my perspective, it seems like the people who are in prison are no differently human than the people who are out of prison. The same humanity is present in all of them. Even in the people I know are psychopaths who have severe developmental issues, their brain injuries that lead them also to have very poor impulse control, still fully human. I can see and recognize all of their humanity. So I know that the things that we do that can harm each other are things humans can do. They're not things only monsters can do. They're just things humans can do. And in trying to metabolize and find the wisdom in my life and reading Dhamma and thinking about Dhamma and practicing Dhamma, I've come to a belief that the parts of where Dhamma is the hardest to put in place, the parts of our human life where it's the hardest, the most challenging to live in a liberated way, are the places where we get close to good and bad, right and wrong, and safety and comfort. That the drives we humans have to be safe, to be connected, to be included in the human social group, our drives for well-being are so deep that it's very, very hard to liberate them from ego. And I feel like this teaching of Buddhadasa is his finger pointing at the moon, saying, we all need to look at our favorite parts of life. We need to look at the things we write poetry about. We need to look at the places where we offer obeisance or worship or deep ritualized regard, high regard, and see what we're clinging and craving to. Not because that clinging and craving is just inherently a problem, but because it's a prison. And this is a very interesting way of understanding what the freedom of awakening could be. The freedom, what's taken away by imprisonment is freedom to act and freedom to choose. And this is the kind of freedom that the texts say is available for an awakened being. How my teacher Panyawati talks about it is that a true bodhisattva is able to do whatever is necessary to be a safe harbor that will do no harm to all other beings. So it's not just that we wish to be helpful to other people. It's not just that we wish for the freedom of everyone else. We don't just have a heart full of bodhicitta, but that we actually are able to do what is necessary to do no harm. And this is, for me, what this means is that if a teacher needs to speak to somebody and maybe curse or be harsh in their language because that's the audience, that there's no problem with that, but that the teacher knows when and how to do that. That if a teacher needs to confront somebody, they know how to do that without doing harm. That I'm just sort of looking for the words. What is very challenging is to imagine that sometimes what is best for us to do in the moment will go directly against some of our most beloved self-restrictions. So the joke I have about this is that when a Dharma teacher knows that they need to dress up like a clown to deliver their Dharma talk, and they can do that fully and completely, then I know that they have achieved a sort of non-self different than many Dharma teachers. Because most of us want to not be clowns when we do our Dharma talks. We want to be completely, look good, be easily recognized in our authority, be very well respected. We have, in that moment where we have ambition to be a good teacher, a Dharma teacher is in a prison. In the moment where each of us have the desire to be a perfect Buddhist, we are in a prison. Anytime we are feeling the desire to help or to be positive support, and that is not what's welcome, but we can't stop ourselves. We're in a prison. This is so I'm referring back to some of the categories in the Dharma teaching of Buddhadasa there, talking about goodness, purity, and sensations. You can get very far on the path and still be quite mired in a lot of clinging. And this is hard to see if the reason you're mired so deeply in the clinging is that the structure of that clinging is actually giving you the moral strength to do what you need to do as a Buddhist. if becoming a good Buddhist is what gives you the personal strength to say no to yourself, if becoming giving honor to your teacher is what gives you the moral strength or the personal strength to show up every morning at 5 a.m. for a sit. These are challenging prisons because it's a structure we've imposed on our own mind in order to be good, in order to get things right. And yet it's a structure that will, in its long-term impact, inhibit our freedom as much as any prison would inhibit freedom. And so I think that by looking for things like disconnection, meaninglessness, confusion, rather than looking for clinging itself, we can see clinging more clearly in the areas where we're talking about things that are very close to the core of what motivates us. If we can feel for reactions of moralism, judgment, if we can see the judge and the parole officer, then sometimes we can identify places where we have our shoulds held up in such a way that they're going to eventually become prisons. Because what can be, I think, easy is turning to Dhamma in suffering. And I think it can also be fairly directly easy to turn to Dhamma when we feel maybe great compassion for others. But when we get to the place where all that we have to let go of is our sense that we're good or we're doing this well or we're honoring our teachers, that gets to be very tricky to let go of. It's very tricky to let go of your high regard for teachers and Dhamma. And it's very tricky to let go of trusting your instincts and trusting your body's sensations when you have a lot of clarity, because those all have been the structures that got you where you are. And so this kind of opportunity is what I think of as a late stage practice. You create a kind of imprisonment by clinging to certain things, and it gets you to behaviors and insights that free you of a lot of negative clinging. But when you get to that level of freedom, then you have to go in towards the clinging to what's positive and what's good and undermine and free yourself from that. And that becomes so much more frightening. In prison, we have a phrase we use called institutionalized, where if a guy's been in prison long enough that he no longer can function without the structure of prison, if he destabilizes as soon as he's out on the street, we would say he's gotten institutionalized. The structure of the prison is part of his self-control. But the same can happen, I think, for Dharma teachers and for Dharma students, is that we can end up creating a kind of a structure that we lean into so much that if it's removed for any reason, we actually destabilize. And so for me, what this offering does, it gives us a chance to examine as we go the positive prisons that we're creating. And here by positive, I mean, I guess, for the right reasons, with the right intentions, with positive intentions. We still can bind ourselves. And this is a way for us to start undermining that along the way. Because what I see is as teachers get further and further, as students, as anyone in Dhamma gets further and further realized, they can sometimes become more and more blind to the ways that freedom is inherently risky and a little bit unknown. And you end up in a place where you are so comfortable and stabilized because your behavioral constraints are safe and your community is safe and your perspective and view is good, that you're not experiencing much dukkha, and you can move forward with a lot of confidence that you won't suffer. But you're not free to act in the world. You're not free to act in the world because as soon as you get close to action, the judge and the parole officer start coming up, and the wounds of long-term imprisonment start coming up, a sense of confusion. So this is my attempt to try to articulate how this one teaching and a little bit of facts about prison can lead us to, as senior students, can lead us to working on freeing ourselves further so that we truly can become bodhisattvas. We can become people who can do whatever is necessary to create windows of freedom and windows of liberation, or to walk through them, maybe not create them. What do you all think about that? How does that land with you? Yeah. Brett? Oh, I didn't see your hand yet, Natalie. Sorry. So I'll go with Brett first and then you.
Sorry, I don't even know where my to put up my icon is, but well, I was also thinking about, I know Buddhadasa was from Thailand, but for Western students, there's the Judeo-Christianness, I think, that we're raised with a bit more
Mm-hmm.
I good, like, striving for goodness, and then also parental, like our attachment, like childhood attachments. And I think of myself in the people pleasing, and I don't know if that's uniquely Western, but just the lack of attunement from the parental structures that complicates things along the path. And I get that there is a universality, but there is something that I think I see in Western Dharma or Sanghas that has a bit of puritanical or purity, attachment to purity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Natalie, what did you have to say?
Something along the same lines as what Brett said, and you mentioned it before in discussing your mom. That's shame and guilt. Like, I should do this. I'm not a good daughter if I don't do that. I'm not a good Buddhist if I don't do that. And those kinds of things actually don't really help me be a better Buddhist. They kind of mess me up. And I get in a situation often where I'm either overextended or I just don't do what I should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Comfortable with able to and having this vision. I walk around in a state of confusion as well, and being comfortable with being able to clear that away for myself. I'm still trying to develop the skills for that, and this kind of enlightens me and kind of shows me some ways that I can do that for myself. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm hurting somebody else or hurting myself, but it's a big leap for me to even think this way or to attempt to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different kind of morality for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but shame and guilt are like loom large for me, and they are part, of, I guess, my prison. And putting it out there that I feel this way or thinking this way is hard for me.
Mm. I really appreciate you sharing. I feel like I'm vibing to everything you've said today. I feel it, and I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that this is part of how it can be difficult, is if we take shame and guilt as themselves the problem. For example, it can be very, very disempowering to work with shame and guilt because of the qualities shame and guilt have of disempowerment. So as soon as you get into contact with them, their influence on the mind is very strong. But if we were to see shame and guilt as markers of moralism and not as in and of themselves the problem, but as symptoms of a different problem, I've had much better time untangling myself from certain things by thinking that the shame and guilt is showing me a structure of imprisonment. Where's the structure of imprisonment? What is the thing that I'm caught up in? And I hope that that rings true for others. I hope that as you explore, that maybe some of the signs, the of moralism, of judgment, of punishment as a reward, of growth through proving yourself, that those dynamics can be questioned not as within themselves problematic dynamics, but as markers of some other hidden dynamic that you haven't yet identified. Connected to what you're saying, I'm going to pull out a very specific problem. When I talk about my work with people, a lot of times, especially in the Buddhist world, people will say, I could never do what you do. I could never do what you do. And that for me is a really big red flag of like, here's a place a person needs to question if awakening is on the horizon. If awakening is the direction you're aiming yourself, why could you not do that is a good question. And I'm not trying to dismiss any individuals. I'm speaking sort of broadly right now. But when I inquire into what people are worried about, they often say, I could not have so much kindness and patience for people who had done such harm. Or I could not be witness to so much suffering. And I feel like those are two really important markers to be aware of in Dhamma, especially if you're a Buddhist who does frontline work with any marginalized communities or frontline work with any people who are quite ill, is the resistance to being in contact with suffering and the resistance we have to offering metta, to feeling metta when in the presence of harm doers, is a very deep instinct and a very challenging set of sensations. But the Buddha, he said something in the Pali Suttas. I've not seen this discussed a lot anywhere, but one of the things he said was that the path to full liberation is so against the grain of human nature. It goes so against the stream of the direction our nature would have us flow that it can only be driven by the strong one emotion. There's only one emotion strong enough to drive a human all the way back to the source, to find the deepest entanglements in the ego to be released. And that is the quivering of the heart that arises when you truly understand the dukkha of the world. When you can truly feel how much suffering not just everyone is in, but how much suffering they're causing for their future selves by their actions to compensate for the suffering they're in now. When you see the vast eternal causality net that just entraps all sentient beings in so much suffering, it makes the sort of the strings of your heart quiver in anguish, and that is the only sensation strong enough to drive a person against their instincts to liberate themselves from all craving. And to be able to get to a place where you can feel that willingly, you have to practice, at least that's been my experience. You have to practice being a witness to pain and practice being a friend to your own pain, not so as to resolve it, but so as to neutralize its impact on your reactive habits. Because when we see great pain, we wish to comfort it. But in doing so, we tend to not really see the pain very clearly because we're looking for ways to quiet it, reduce it, bring it to the end. And so we don't necessarily have a chance to actually understand it and understand the conditions that preceded it. To when we talk about, let's say, Kuan Yin, we talk about, there's a name for her in Chinese where she is she who hears the cries of the world. And that can have this very lofty, romantic, positive feeling of a mother who's always available to us. But I want to invite you to picture being Kuan Yin and hearing the cries of the world. What if you could hear every sentient being's whining, every sentient being's crying, every sentient being's raging? What if you were on your cloud, an enlightened being, and you could hear all the cries of the world? How loud would it be? How cacophonous would the pain of the world be? My sense of it is it would be pretty loud. And the development of peacefulness that is peacefulness within hearing the cries of the world, my experience of that is that it has a lot of daring in it, and it takes a lot of emotional risks. That to understand the peacefulness that can be friends with pain means that you understand peacefulness that doesn't come from sensations or instinct or morality, but peacefulness that comes from non-attachment. I mean, and that we all know that. We've studied Dhamma. That's what we're being invited often to feel. But what's also true is when we're on retreat or we're doing practices with groups, the teachers try to create training environments that are as generally as peaceful and comfortable as possible to facilitate and nourish qualities of tranquility and concentration, qualities of steadiness of mind. The very factors that make our meditation easier make our bravery to truly be present with pain sometimes harder. Because in many ways, meditation is easiest when life is easiest. And feeling pain can be very challenging. But part of why feeling pain is so challenging is because we have created a prison of sensations where we are trying to make structures that equate painful feelings with bad and freedom from painful feelings as good and painful feelings as impure and feelings of the absence of painful feelings as pure. We end up instinctively consolidating certain categories together, and it makes sense that we do that. This isn't a grave mistake. I think it's a very normal consolidation, but it's a consolidation that hides some of the deepest ties that keep us clinging. And this is why I wanted to, and I'm always exploring, how do we find those ties and dig them up when all of our instincts and how it feels and our social behavior patterns want us to not dig them up, because in those directions lie problems, painful feelings, not really problems, just pain. As we start to approach insight into our prisons, we will potentially run into those qualities of long-term imprisonment, especially confusion and disorientation. At least that's been it for me. And I believe, just like all of my Dharma practice, that we try to practice in easy situations so we're ready to practice in hard situations. That if we start to look for our clinging and craving in the areas Buddhadasa talks about more skillfully, that they can really prepare us in real life for showing up for other people's pain and for our own pain in a non-reactive and grounded way that's free to act. And this again comes back to that idea that a bodhisattva is not just someone who wants to do good, but someone who can do what is the most appropriate thing. So let's imagine, a most appropriate thing being that a Dharma teacher needs to stand up and walk out of a talk, or the most appropriate thing being that as you listen to someone who's in pain, you need to laugh at them, or the most appropriate thing being that you see someone on the street who's in need of medical help and you need to bring them home with you to support them. Like, how inhibited are we sometimes from total freedom? If total freedom is a place where you can step in any direction without inhibition, any possible direction is equally available, any action is equally available, that is a space where wisdom can be the only guide, because there are no little feelings in our heart guiding us. There are no little ticklings in our body or nervous system guiding us. We have to use wisdom as a guide. And yeah, so all of what I've offered over the last 2 weeks is meant to be fuel for people who find themselves at a place where they're really looking for pathways into dangerous freedoms. Dangerous not because I mean, in some ways, all freedoms are dangerous, but in this case, dangerous because they feel dangerous. They feel scary. And that's what happens when you're leaving a prison. It feels scary. In a particular flavor of being daunted by the possibilities. So I was hoping to offer all these teachings and some guidelines on how to reflect on them. Yeah, it's just so people could have a chance to do some deeper work. And in a sense, that's sort of my whole talk. I think I've covered all the basics. Perhaps not quite as linearly as I would have liked to, but I feel like I've covered all the basics. I really would love to hear more from all of you, your reflections, your resistance, your ideas. Anyone who hasn't talked yet who'd like to talk? Easy.
I would just say in our society, including like in our mental health system, in lots of our systems, there's a real aversion to I was going to say there's an aversion to even talking about the realities of nervous systems. But yeah, I mean, I think that often that the repression is so systemic and so ubiquitous. Even those, like, I mean, the idea of sitting with grief, like my hesitance would not be about that. And it's never been about that. But I've realized doing a lot of work myself that like I was never shown how to grieve, and I've never been given support with grieving and shown how to sit with really big pain. And if you don't have the tools for sitting with that pain and you don't have anyone to sit with that kind of gravity, it's really difficult. Which is a very different thing from not wanting to looking, you know.
Well said. Well said. So do you feel like you have found tools?
Some days it's still really hard. I mean, I don't have a lot of demands on me, and I've had to create a life that's pretty low in demands in order to do the things that support my ventral vagal, for example, you know, to do the things that, you know, to meditate, to spend time in nature, to listen to the birds, and to not be taking the subway and dealing with all that kind of stuff. But for me, for my nervous system, you know, I had neurodivergence that I was not aware of, a very sensitive nervous system. Like I wasn't able to do that. I think if I had had tools early, I might have been able to move through things skillfully or more skillfully and sort of make, but it was always kind of trying to negotiate and like figure out a way to that kind of worked for my nervous system. I don't know. I just think I think it's a problem that I'm seeing in my community, which is people who have really burned out systems in many ways, and chronic illness as a result of, yeah, chronic exposure. And
Indeed.
some of the real good deed doers, you know, like a lot of people who have like gone into these fields to help, and
Right.
just like their nervous systems can't at some point couldn't take it.
Yes,
Even if
and
it doesn't show up that way, it could show up in a totally physical, somatic, other.
yeah, absolutely. I want to reflect on that from my perspective, so I'm not trying to take issue with what you said, but yeah, I've certainly done a lot of my own work with my nervous system somatically. But one of the things I have experienced in prison work is that um, I want to live in a world where people are safe, and that's not a real world. And coming to terms with how unreal a world it is has been uh, one of the most painful things I've ever gone through. The first 4 or 5 years I worked in the prisons, I was so sensitized by all of the pain I was witnessing that I couldn't watch any shows about any crime or anything that got anywhere close to harm doing or the criminal justice system. I couldn't watch because I was like, oh, that's all I do with my days. But eventually, I really wanted to watch that movie, The Room, with Brie Larson. I wanted to see how they told that story, and we got about 20 minutes into the story, and then I had to stop, and I thought, I know people who've done what is happening in this movie. I know people who have kidnapped women. I know people who've held people hostage. And I've meditated with them, and I've offered them my compassionate friendship, and I've offered them, support in their pain. And in learning how to do that and learning how to bridge the distance between myself and an offender who's incarcerated in a prison, I had to go through so many layers of like my training of be scared of violent men, be scared of angry men, be scared of people who've committed rape, be scared of people who kidnap children. I had to actually sort of untangle from those guidelines of safety and be like, nope, that's not my job anymore. That's not what I do anymore. But seeing that movie, I realized I'd completely stopped thinking about the victims of the crimes, that I'd worked so hard in the prison to be able to be with those who had done harm. I had not been thinking about those to whom they had harmed. And then I think at that moment, I really started to feel uh, the pain of the world, seeing that for each one of us who has been a victim, there is a harm doer who has also probably been a victim, and their harm doers were victims, and all of us are creating victims. And I sort of had this profound period of a couple hours of what felt to me like grasping the interwoven threads of pain that the human life is in a way that I had never felt before. And I was overwhelmed with it, overwhelmed with it, overwhelmed with it. And for a few months, it led me to think I have to stop doing this work. I can't possibly sink into this reality any deeper than I am. I'll drown. And then one day I was talking to myself about it all, and I said, okay, what's changed? What's changed? People have been hurting each other since the dawn of time. People have been victims to each other since the dawn of time. Prisons have existed since before I was born. All these crimes have been going on my whole life. The only difference that is there is the difference of I did not know about it, and now I do. So my ignorance has given way to knowledge. And I think for me, it struck me that if I can't handle reality, I should probably not be a Buddhist because that's pretty much our jam. Our jam is try to see the world as it is. And when I look at the world as it is, I realize that the world as it is not what I was told. I was really raised to believe there was inherent good and there was sort of a qualities of communalism and qualities of love in everyone, and that violence and selfishness and harm were aberrations. And to really understand that those weren't aberrations, that those are just as parallel part of us as all the good and communalism. There's also selfishness and violence, and that there's no story of life that isn't violent. Fundamentally, rocked me to understand that it was a belief in our inherent goodness or communal nature that led me to be a brave Buddhist. But eventually, that belief had to die. For me to continue to be a brave Buddhist, that belief had to die, and I had to understand that the inherent power we all have in our own lives is coupled with an inherent vulnerability we have in regards to each other. Anybody could hurt me, and I could hurt anybody. Anybody could kill me, and I could kill anybody. That this is not an aberrant behavior. It's absolutely a possibility at any moment. If the wrong causes and conditions come together, harm can be done, and I can experience harm or be the harm doer. It undermined my Buddhist path for quite a few years to try to renegotiate motivation and commitment in Buddhism without romanticized positivity, without romanticized goodness. It was a really big challenge. I'm not saying I'm through that, but our nervous systems are trained so young, and our nervous systems are primed to seek out safety. Why babies need to do things instinctively that will trigger caregivers to carry them along with them and not leave them behind. There's so many reasons why we are going to feel challenges in our nervous system when we really see reality. But on the other side of that doorway, I like to imagine is the ability to build great capacity.
That's the goal. See
Right?
attention.
Right? Just to build great capacity. And so one of the capacities of uh, a bodhisattva, I believe, has to be not just bravery, but wildness, the capacity to do sort of the wild things that spark possibilities of freedom. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. But thank you for sharing, Heather. Is it Hella?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm deeply, deeply touched by what you shared. And I have a question for you, which perhaps links to what you said earlier regarding to be brave to do the thing that demands to be done in that situation, guided solely by wisdom. That's something that deeply touched my heart. And I found myself in some situations that I've questioned, what is that thing? And contrary to deeply held, perhaps historical kind of ways that perhaps I've acted that I didn't think, that's surprising myself in ways that I that I didn't think were possible. But my question is specific, particularly in relation to your work with prisoners, because in some situations, we come to deeply feel what is the thing that needs to be done, guided by wisdom. But often, or sometimes, there are people on which this, for example, let's say if you have a prisoner in front of you and you see them suffering quite a bit and you want them to be better, and you can see that there are seeds of wanting that well-being, of yearning for it, of that you feel through your teaching or through other things that are going on in the prison, that you have the capacity and the power to create those conditions for that prisoner to start to feel well-being and to start on a path that perhaps they could feel greater freedom, inner freedom, and then obviously on the path of outer freedom. And yet there is resistance that comes up, not from yourself or from ourselves who are wanting to do this, but the resistance can come from the prisoner themselves and the person you want to help. And I'd be curious to hear, particularly in cases where you have overcome this fear to do the thing, how did you face that? How did you come to a situation where that thing that demands to be done got done despite this resistance? I don't know if this makes sense, but you're smiling, so
Yes, and I'm just trying. I don't know if this is an appropriate answer, but I would say that I think consciously that the path I've chosen is I have to give up wishing anybody well-being. I have to give up wishing anybody less suffering than they're already in. I have to give up all attachment for anybody to be any happier than they already are, and just work with the causes and conditions that are around me and try to plant them and help nourish the seeds that I see growing. And so one of the biggest shifts was from wanting people to overcome their resistance to well-being to ignoring their resistance to well-being, and instead wanting people to know that whatever state I find them in, I will treat them with exactly the same amount of kindness, respect, and high regard as I would a teacher. And even if they are the foolest of fools, the Buddha often called worldlings foolish. Like, even if they are just being the most foolish human being I've ever seen, to just validate that their feelings are arising for good reason and their behaviors can be decided upon with wisdom, and just keep that hard line of, I don't need you to not be in pain for us to be okay. We're okay. I'm okay with you. Even though you are just hemorrhaging with pain. You're just like, because sometimes, yeah, guys in prison are really, 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 really miserable. And have that be the starting point of just how does it look to be kind with someone in that much pain? How does it look to be respectful to someone who's doing it to themselves as they are metaphorically stabbing themselves, to just be like, oh yeah, look at you, you're stabbing yourself. Okay. And just be like, I can respect that you have agency. I can respect that you are trying to end the feeling that you're having. I can respect that you are motivated from the same places that I'm motivated from, but your wisdom is not kicking in right now. So like, let's just try to talk about choices that you have. And so for me, that is much more important because in prison, if I tell people something worth hearing, they'll come back 9 months later and say, I've been thinking about that thing you said for 9 months. And now I think I'm ready to talk about it. And that has been a real blessing that you don't get in all contexts. A lot of times we don't have much patience in the moment. We want to see resolution quickly. And sometimes that's because if you're talking about frontline work, you don't have very long with that person. But I really do believe that you have to just, you know, take in all of it with one taste. I mean, that's what they talk about in Dhamma, right? That you have that all of reality, all of the experiences, one taste. And that means one treatment, just patience, respect. And when people are very foolish, I also, to be true, I am always experimenting with new ways of approaching people. So I dare a great deal. And sometimes I'm very silly, and sometimes I'm very formal, and sometimes I ask people for religious behavior, and sometimes I ask people for intellectual behavior. And part of it is just trying to understand what works. And so there is a quality of experimentation that I bring into my work that I will try to let my intuition guide me and do things. You know, one of the places this kind of exploration of opening to pain and freeing oneself from the prisons of things have to be safe and comfortable and pure is that it can really lead into a bit of nihilism, because you start to realize that if you let drop high quality goals, like you want high quality from your impact on other people, you want high quality meaning positive choices made, whatever, is that it all starts to be a little arbitrary. You're like, well, if I'm not trying to help you get better, then what are we even doing here? I'm just listening to you be unhappy. But it's to bring in a bit of surrealist humor. I find that humor is, in my school of Buddhism, quite missing. I do not feel the same in Tibetan Buddhism at all, but I feel like in Thai Buddhism, there can be some real like dour seriousness. And I have ended up studying surrealist comedy to help me understand how clowning techniques work and how humor works. But also I've had the chance, because I'm in Canada and we have Indigenous elders in every prison. I've worked with many Indigenous elders quite a bit. They've been my mentors and supports for decades, and they have taught me so much about survival through laughing at yourself. They have taught me so much. Like, as a white woman who was raised by serious parents, I had to really learn to get over that, and I'm still learning to get over that. And I think that, one of the things I see quoted is, how do you respond what's the best way to respond to a totalitarian dictator, is to tease them, is to mock them, is to laugh at them. If you can undermine the prison through humor, it actually really functions to do half the work for you. So I have a couple techniques I use a lot to help me open up possibility. And one is, where's my camera? I have an imaginary sock puppet, which is just my little hand making little. And if I can tell that people are getting really wound up in anger, I will start to sock puppet there our words. I'll like have two little sock puppets, and just that act of bringing a little lightness and being a little bit childlike into pain can go really well. It can also not go well. It's a risk that you do. But also singing little songs doing little dances, like just really just standing up and not letting the tone of pain be the tone of the conversation is this huge leap forward of coming out of prison. If you are scared to cause pain or cause embarrassment, especially to yourself, you will not stand up and wiggle around and do a little song and dance while somebody's freaking out. But if you're able to, it can really change the world. I don't know if you all study a lot of mythology or the myths, but like there's a story in Japan of the sun gets very the sun and the moon are brother and sister, and the sun is the sister, and she gets all upset and she goes to hide in a cave and she won't come out, and so her brother comes up and moons her, and like he literally bends around and shows her his bum and waggles it around, and she becomes so like flustered and outraged and laughing that she comes out of her cave and the sun returns to the world. I think it's sort of a story about eclipses, maybe, and the moon's showing its backside to the sun or something like that. But I feel like if we can humiliate ourselves a little bit, it can actually help free up a lot of the dynamics. Because if you're coming in as a caregiver, then someone will tend to come in as a child or come in as a wounded person seeking the help. And if you're like, I'm not a caregiver, I'm a fool, um, it can help redefine the dynamic between everybody. So I like to make voices, and I like to do little theater plays above my head with my sock puppets, and I like to do lots of different things, invite people to imagine things differently. Humor can get us through what seriousness cannot.
So helpful. So helpful. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
you're welcome. Thank you. There was something that was said last week that I had wanted to address, and I can't remember if the person who said it is here now. I can't remember who said it, but someone had mentioned that they lived near a convicted felon, that they had like a neighbor or someone in their house even, but someone who lived nearby them who was a harm doer, who had I can't remember what the crime was, but someone who had done some kind of a violent crime, and they were clearly a bad neighbor, and this person was saying they had a real hard time having having compassion for them. And a lot of times Buddhists are coached to have empathy and kindness for those who have done harm and will do harm by imagining how much they're suffering. But I think the final thing I wanted to add was that I really disagree with that. I really disagree with taking a stance of, I'm going to generate my warmth for you by feeling a little sorry for you, imagining that you're in pain and that's why you're hurting people. I want to just invite people to not go too far into that dynamic, because we tend to distance ourselves from the reality we actually understand of doing harm. And I instead invite you to write your own life story from the perspective of how you have used and manipulated through force other people and yourself, and look for those times you are your own jailer. Because only when me asserting this, only when a person understands the comfort and safety of self-dominance, how pleasant it feels to be like, I know I can keep myself from ever making this error again. And I feel glad that I have such strong inhibition that I will never do this. Only when we really can understand the way that domination is such a wonderfully sure path for those for who it works? Can we really maybe empathize with and connect with harm doers? When I used to see displays of violence and anger in the prisons, I would get very rattled. I would get very, very rattled. And I eventually was coached by others to get really, really curious and try to figure out what they're trying to do. Um, and not worry so much about the amount of violence they're using to get it done. That was helpful, but what was really helpful for me was then to try to figure out, how do I use violence to get things done? And the prison of goodness and the prison of purity, we sometimes create those because they become great ways to rehabilitate ourselves into very obedient people who are habituated to make pleasant choices. And if you disinhibit around that and you let yourself be someone who could say something rude or could say something pointed and critical, not that you are saying them, but you just disinhibit enough to know that you could, somewhere in there of touching on the power that you have, really can help you see the vulnerability that other people have to you. To, like, you are all vulnerable to me. I could be a real bitch. I could just be a pointed, critical person demeaning each of you for the whole duration of my Dharma talk, if I chose to. And to know that that is a quality of potential means I have to keep my knife sheathed. And until I know how to sheath my own knife, how can I coach anyone else to sheath theirs? Until I know how to have the power to act but choose not to act, how can I really, has been a question for me that has been very helpful. One of the things about softening practices, letting go practices, is often they don't have quite enough callousing. They don't help us be ready for rough and tumble play with each other, with the world. They don't help us. I mean, they help us gain sensitivity or reconnect with our sensitivity, and that's super valuable. But we also really need to be able to, I think, to be able to do rough and tumble play with the world and get a few bruises on our path, to even get injured on our path in the sense that we feel pain. And so maybe that's where I'll leave us, is that there's I think, a really big unanswered question in the Dhamma, at least from what I've studied, which is, what's the difference between pain and harm? If I am vowing ahimsa, no harm to life, how is that different than no negative or painful experience in life? Like, if I am trying to coach myself or another person, can I push them in ways that are uncomfortable without doing harm? Do I know where it, because we tend to sort of think of it as a line, that a little bit of pain is harmless and a lot of pain is harmful. Especially our nervous systems coach us towards that, where the nervous system, who's the interpreter sometimes of pain, will start to get very distressed when there's a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. But to appreciate how compromised and how painful we can live, and that we can, we have as much capacity to feel a myriad uncomfortable sensations as we have the capacity to feel a myriad of pleasant and comfortable sensations. And this is actually our birthright, is a full range of sensory experience, from torture to ecstasy. And torture and ecstasy join at the end. And so it's just a big circle from high intensity to low intensity, pleasant to unpleasant. And that all of that is our birthright. And all of that being possible is what freedom actually invites us to, is I think really daring to embody. In the Pali Suttas, the Buddha, he gets angry or certainly irritable. He calls people fools. He refuses to cooperate. There's lots of stories in the Pali Suttas of the Buddha having a huge range of social dynamics, from very respectful and loving to very critical and confrontational, even. And he often was quite challenging. But I think I see that this is less common in Buddhist circles in North America these days. And I think part of it is that, you know, we're still integrating Buddhism into Western culture. And if you're from a, you know, European diaspora settler background like I am, hundreds of years of dynamics don't just get undone by reading a few Dharma books. It takes a lot to disinhibit and to explore. But somewhere in there is we cannot imagine that pain is not our birthright and that pain is dangerous, and get all the way to awakening. That is just an impossibility. So even that, like picturing, if you're picturing your teacher as a Buddha, or you're reading a Dhamma book and you're sort of holding up the Dhamma in high regard, is just to think, and pain is going to be part of this. And loss is, you know, pain is so much of this. How do I know how to relate to pain? How many flavors of interaction can I have with pain? Do I know how to play with it? Do I know how to nap with it? Do I know how to enjoy my life while I'm feeling it? Do I know how to grieve it? Do I know how to express it creatively? It's a really good question. If we're looking for prisons that are hard to see, uh, that might be one of the biggest ones for a lot of us. Yeah. I think we must be, yeah, down. Oh, we're over. I should stop talking.
Thank you so much for being here today and last week.
You all are wonderfully generous with your thanks. I appreciate it. I feel like this is I just hope it was at all useful, any part of it, to any of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll
So
let you
I
know
will,
that I had a good conversation with a friend who's a meditation teacher about last week.
oh, good. Well, I think that's it then. I have nothing more that I should say because time is up. I wish you well. If you ever have any questions or want to talk about these kinds of topics, you're welcome to reach out to me. Last week, people got my email. I'm happy for them to get it again this week. Yeah, I don't teach much outside of the prisons. I really am focused on I'm going to be developing a prison chaplaincy program over the next few years, and I have been working on it for a couple years. And so eventually, maybe 2028 or so, I'll be starting that. But for now, I'm basically just a person you can chat with, and I don't have any classes or anything. But I wish you all well on your path.
See you soon.
Take care.
Bye.